welcome. 2019, first episode. Delve further with my good friend. I'd say one of my better friends in Overwatch and in esports in general and in life. Yiska, Sasha Heinisch. I think you always have to like put the emphasis and try to be German when you say. Is that right? Heinisch? Am I saying it right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Now we were watching. Go ahead.
You were saying emphasis. You put emphasis on every single syllable there. So. Sasha
Heinisch.
Like, come on, dude. Okay.
Now we were watching a certain Warcraft 3 pro gamers or former pro gamer, I guess, and he was talking about, and this is Grubby for those who don't get the inside joke. He was talking about how his last name meant like it was kind of like rare and like only like his family has that last name and like it doesn't necessarily like is shared, and how his like name meant something in, I think it was German. Does your name kind of translate into anything interesting? I think you mentioned that like Kick Tripod's last name was like Man of the Woods.
Yeah, so something like this. Well, for my last name, it's sort of weird because I think on the surface, if you give that to a German person, they probably wouldn't find out anything. I think what might have happened is that if you put an R in front of my name, then it suddenly makes sense because it becomes Rheinisch, and in that sense, it's like the adjective to Rhine, the big not like river that's flowing through my city here. But at the same time, I think my family from that part of the family comes from more like towards Poland, so that wouldn't even make sense. But maybe there was a little bounce around like Eastern Europe back, and stuff like that. But yeah, generally on the surface, it doesn't translate to anything. So
people know you most for being, I'd say, one of the kind of leading thinkers not tied to an Overwatch team, right? You're out there creating original content, coming up with concepts, pushing ideas forward, opinionated to some degree. And I don't think people realize that you actually have like a pretty extensive history in esports pre like the golden age, right? So like pre like 2011, 2012, like in that big explosion to kind of that's carried us to where we are now. So a lot of people don't realize that you kind of like first started in like Warcraft 3. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, like back in the day, I basically I was 16 or something. We were just done with playing CS and everything, and basically what we wanted to do was like play in clan leagues with other folk just from my local area, and then we played some rather high up leagues. We didn't play the biggest league, which is sort of like the Champions League with actually sponsored teams. We were like semi-sponsored, had like a little bit of hardware deals here and there. We also bounced around, did our own thing, created our own clan. And there we had some interesting people in that clan. And if you're interested in that story.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so...
Tangents, dude. Any and all.
All right, so my friends and I are have our own clan, and we're playing in the highest amateur league, so to speak. And we're getting like scouted and whatever. And a friend of mine and I leave for a longer vacation, like 3 weeks, like our first like own vacation. We were, I think, 16 or something. And we always snuck into the internet cafe to check out what our clan was doing on the Battle.net client, and also in the league, because we were one of the key players, so we wouldn't know how they would do, and we wanted to see the results. So, and our other friend, who was always that guy was insane, right? Not only was he very good at the game, but he also had a way to talking people into doing stuff with him. So we check out the internet, our clan profile on the internet cafe, and someone joins, and his name is Death Kosh 1. And we check him out, and he's first on the just normal ranked ladder in Europe.
Sure.
And we we look over at an A, and he's also first in an A on both West and East Coast. And we're like, how did this guy get him into the clan? And he's playing Clan Wars for us at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 days before we come back, we're like, wow, we're coming back and we have this great talent and whatever. Maybe we get some sponsors and whatever. And we come back and I get home, drive up the PC and look, and Death Coach 1 is gone. And he didn't play in the clan war that just finished because we were getting back. We couldn't delay there.
Right.
So we talked to our friend. He's like, yeah, he was very drunk and turned out like he was very rude to me. I kicked him. And we're like, well, that was an amazing player. And to be fair, at the time, it turned out he was map hacking.
Ah.
The thing is, what we didn't know at the time, of course, was that he became SK Deadman, one of the more well-known European players. At the time, for a long while, actually an arc rival to Grubby. I think him and Moon were the only ones that ever took a best of 5 from Grubby for a very long time in their career. SK Deadman was legitimately an amazing player, and he just randomly strolled into our clan, but was kicked because he was rude to this guy. So, yeah, that was insane.
Well, there you go, a little Warcraft 3 history. Now, you know, tying back into that intro, you know, we were watching Grubby the other day, and you had mentioned like offhandedly that, you know, in those team leagues, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said that you had practiced quite a bit in like the 2v2 league primarily, right?
Yeah.
Now you've had like some matches against Grubby, correct? Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah, we had some. So okay, yes, of course, always you have ladder matches.
Sure,
and you meet them very often there, and then we had in-game tournament clients, and there we also met them in the finals if they were, you know, they were often on tournaments and whatever. And these in-game tournaments, especially the 2v2s, weren't that interesting to them, though we did often face in the finals some pro player team that were preparing for, I think it was W3CL it was called, and they still had 2v2. So these teams still needed to practice, and the tournaments were the best part because it would ramp up the ranking very quickly and you would get good matches in these tournaments. So they would practice there. And then we had, I think, 2 clan war matches. I think we went 1-1 ultimately. Of course, a player like Grubby didn't care that much about 2v2s, and most of the time the meta was sort of strange. When we played, it was still dedicated 2v2 teams dominating that bracket.
Sure.
Later on, it was just like you put the 2 best 1v1 players into a team, and that's the best 2v2 team in the world, you know? So that meta sort of turned there.
Now, because Warcraft 3 is, you know, possibly could see a resurgence in popularity, and you know, for a while it's been slowly building back up a following for the most part, and we're seeing China put forth a good amount of money for Warcraft 3 with Reforged. I kind of want to get into a little bit of the history, so I'm going to spit a couple names at you that just come to my mind, because I'm a very layman when it comes to Warcraft 3, but it's always been something that has been kind of tied into like some of the esports that I followed, like StarCraft. You always saw like a little bit of crossover, like you saw Moon. I think Lynn actually participated a long time ago, like early GSLs for like We Made Fox, which again, if I remember correctly, was a big clan. So like just from those names, like could you contextualize like really who Grubby was from somebody who knew Warcraft 3? Like could you really wrap him up in a bow and present him to the audience? Like who really is Grubby? Why should people care about Grubby first off?
Well, basically, if you go down, he even started being pretty good before the expansion came out, the Frozen Throne. So he was already a name then, even though I didn't perceive esports as such at that time.
Sure.
And then later on, when we got TFT and got a little bit more serious, yeah, like, okay, so the experience of watching Warcraft 3 esports was very different than it is now. But it is, due to the ingenuity of a select few, it was actually a pretty good experience for the time. So this must have been, okay, so 2003, 4, something like this.
Sure.
And some dudes made Walk TV. And Walk TV was basically like a streamed replay that through some LAN shenanigans could be streamed to the internet. And then we had Winamp Radio, and you can sync up both of these sources.
Winamp
and
Radio,
you could,
holy.
Yeah, and you could enjoy almost something akin to a stream experience. Of course, not seeing the cast or whatever. That came much later. But yeah, and there, like basically every week, and especially a friend of mine was the Orc player, the crazy guy. He loved watching him. Of course, we also, like, back then, we really... I mean, he was sort of like one of those names that was always up there with the Koreans and also, crucially, the Chinese. As I said earlier, like, there was a time where the crazy part about Grubby is you might beat him in a best of 3. That is possible, right? He was beatable there. His ability to adapt was absolutely insane. He would go down and get so many reverse sweeps, or like go down 2-1 or something like this, but he would figure out his opponent over the series, and that was why it was very hard to beat him in the best of 5. I think up to a point when I stopped following his career, he only ever lost to SK Deadman and then Moon, who was the 5th race. So as far as I'm concerned, Grubby pretty much is one of the 2 best players of Warcraft history,
of all time, yeah.
Together with the 5th race. That's the nickname of Moon.
Right. Now, I definitely have to ask about Moon, because that's somebody that I, kind of understood the mystique around when he started playing in StarCraft 2 for his short stint, but just hearing about it creates a Google search, and from there you go down the black hole of seeing, the legend that he kind of put forward. But I want to throw a curveball. I don't know if you're necessarily expecting this one. Did you, and feel free to back out if you're not necessarily too familiar with him. We know now Montecristo, but previously he did a lot of work in Warcraft 3. Is there anything, did you ever interact with him back in the day?
Sadly not.
No?
I think we were sort of disconnected from the NA scene.
Okay.
Mainly because, also another personality that comes from that era is of course Freak from Riot Games. Yeah, that was sort of the NA scene, and let's be honest, Europe and the Asian countries were
just like
competing
a league
against each other. I would say, like, Europe, that was actually a very competitive era when I watched. I think both Europe, China, and Korea were about the same like level, and then we had 2 shining stars on 2 of those continents, and of course later on China developed themselves superstars. So in that regard, it's amazing. But yeah, like NA, they had like maybe 2 or 3 players that are really like recognized, but yeah, they weren't that good, and because of time zone differences and whatever, and I'm not sure if Walk TV would have even worked there, but yeah, I was more following like the local
the European scene. Fair enough. So then the next player, one of the, I'd say, one of the best now, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking, out of school, best human player. Gotta look at Tot, right? Ever kind of come into contact with?
Ever? I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, so there was a clan that was initially created by a guy called Tillerman, and the mystique about this guy was he came from Warcraft 2 and was one of the best was the best player in the world, as I understood it back then. Not sure if that's true. And he also played in the beginning of Warcraft 3. He played some tournaments, won some, but he was an older guy, so like he took a step back and then created an almost legendary organization that sadly doesn't exist anymore, but it was Four Kings, a British-based organization, and in that there was Grubby and there was Todd, and these guys had a while where it was back and forth between them, right? Of course, playing different races, and there were cool things that, for instance, I'm not sure if Grubby did it specifically against Todd, but I remember a tournament where he would practice Grubby, that is, exclusively, or not exclusively, but as an offhand thing to beat human, he would practice undead. And nobody knew that was happening. And suddenly he pulls it out, and I'm not sure if it was against Todd. It might have been. Yeah, I think it was. And beats him in that way in that tournament, right? And the thing is, I think in general, it was perceived that at the time, human had an advantage against Orc, and human was pretty dominant because undeads generally didn't get that deep into the bracket because, yes, they were good against human, but not that good against the rest, is how I remember it. So if you could off-race, that was, of course, amazing, but the amount of effort that was required, like very few players actually played random or like 2 races at the time. Now, Grubby was, I think, one of the only good ones that I can remember. Yeah.
Fair enough. Now, and again, my names are kind of cherry picked from the few that I've either heard of or done like some minor research on, you know, or had come across. So, you know, again, they might be a little bit, again, towards the layman, you know, some of the big names that you'd see. So, and they're not, you know, some of the more interesting T2 players, we'll call them, right? But the next kind of name that comes to my mind, again, a human player, Sky. Could you kind of encapsulate who Sky was? What did he kind of do for the scene?
Whew, that's now we're getting into foggy.
Okay, fair enough.
I think for a while he was legitimately the best player in the world, even though, like, that is actually not a lot of people know this, but Warcraft was insane in China. So Grubby would go to these events, and so many people would show up, and they would have bodyguards escort him like out of the city because it was insane. That's where the whole fascination with Dota in China comes from, basically, because so many people played Warcraft 3 there. Dota was at the time a custom map for Warcraft, so that went like this, right? But yeah, the fascination with that was insane, and keep in mind, that is 2003, 2004, whatever, that around that time, that we already had these crowds in China. And as far as Sky goes, I remember, I think I watched like a documentary on him where, yeah, it is a struggle because it obviously wasn't that accepted by the older generation in China.
Right.
But like, as it is with parents, as soon as you bring the first check home, that works. And yeah, in general, I think that there were just, I remember there were some, especially the W3CL, which were like clan wars more like between teams. That was always very high between these teams, even though there were, of course, like some ping issues, but then also offline tournaments were pretty exciting at the time. And I remember that Sky really, like, that might have been, like if he met Grubby in the bracket, I think there was a streak where he was just farming him pretty much.
Wow, I mean, again, that's a legend that some people might not have heard of, defeating someone that people are very familiar with. You know, that's something that, again, esports history, something that I think we both enjoy quite a bit. Again, another name coming at you. I said I'd mention him, Moon. You know, this is the 5th race. Very, very famous Night Elf player. Did he start playing Night Elf, or did he transition into playing Night Elf?
No, I think I only remember him playing Night Elf. And I don't even remember why we thought that, but we always thought, okay, he's so different from the other players. Like, during the time, almost, you know, fetishizing of APM came around, and he had pretty high APM. And it was, I think now we call it EAPM, so effective APM.
Right.
And he always seemed to have very high EAPM in that regard. Was immensely successful at multitasking. I remember him being very good at micro, which, by the way, Grubby was also great at. And for those that have never watched Warcraft 3, Warcraft 3 is the RTS where micro is much more demanding and much more important than macro is, because macro, you really only have like maybe 5 production buildings ever. Like even in the late game, most of the time you of course don't build workers late into the game because you can only have a maximum of 5 workers in your gold mine, and then you can have whatever how many you need for harvesting wood. So the macro aspect is not that big unless you have like an expansion or whatever. But then also Night Elves always had this that creeping or that attacking with their buildings because they could unroot and essentially became very slow units. I remember that Moon almost completely changed how Night Elf played there. There were some I think there was a meta during a time. Okay, so for a while it was very annoying that both human and orc would tower rush, and there were especially like a German player called MTW Taker, and he had like the nickname Tower Taker. Like during that time, towers were like the signature move for some of these players, and then these Ancient of War rushes came in, and where you would build what is essentially a barracks
right in someone's base,
not in but near.
Okay.
And the interesting part about these buildings is that they can eat like a tree, like the resource
to heal, right?
To heal,
right?
And it was very hard to kill them then. And depending on what your micro was like or like your techniques, it was very interesting. And always, of course, we also have to think Warcraft wasn't like an RTS based on upkeep,
right?
So upkeep was, if you go over 50 supply, suddenly you're getting less resources, at least gold. And the first upkeep is 30% less. And that's already, you go from a peon brings 10 gold to a peon brings 7 gold in. And then over, I think, either 70 or 80 upkeep, it switches to 30%. And then you're not getting much, right? So it's sort of like a comeback mechanic. Now, Night Elves can extend that by having their Ancient of Wars. And I remember that no matter the state of the game, Moon would always have a super clever way to use, his buildings essentially to gain him an advantage. And yeah, like during the time, it was nuts to see. Like this guy was pretty much unbeatable for the longest time. And I mean, depending on how you rate, I think it's completely fair to say that he was even a little bit better than Grubby when all was said and done.
Fair enough. And I mean, they're all still kind of out there participating. If I remember correctly, I've seen Moon, I think very recently, played either a show match or a tournament in China and ended up donating his prize money to like a school or something. And they're all still out there doing the dang thing. To kind of wrap Warcraft 3 in a nutshell, at least in 2019. Strangely enough, it's weird to say that. Do you think there could ever be a push into prominence again? Do you think that Reforged could be something that people should be paying attention to?
So I think that stands and falls with China, right? I don't know if the West can find love for that again. I think if there's an RTS, and we had the era of RTS basically from like 2011 to like the like 2015 maybe.
Sure.
I think, and before that, of course, with Warcraft as well. Like it was basically like probably like 10 years or 10 to 12 maybe, where those were pretty big esports. If there's an esport that can come, an RTS that can become an esport once again, it would likely be Warcraft 3. Simply because the hero system really takes away a lot from the confusion. You understand a lot of power is built up in these hero systems. And for those that have never played, you have like a hero unit, and they're special, and they can level up, and they gain abilities, and you can build normal units, but you cannot. Most of the time, you go for like 2 heroes over the game, but you can go a maximum amount of 3. But most of the time, the early game is around 1 hero, harassing, gaining experience, because what you also could do is creep. That is kill NPC characters, gain gold, gain items, and experience, crucially. And there are cool mechanics in the game that makes it so that someone might harass you with their hero while their army is creeping, and the main hero will get the experience. And that allows for some really cool interactions around creep camps, not just their concepts like creep jacking. So when someone's doing the big camp and you try to get in, you can do it with a stealth character like the Blade Master, and you just pop out, get the last kill on the minion and steal the item, and you're out. Or you can try to, you know, get them from behind, surround them, force a TP, or even kill some units that are now, you know, weakened by the creep camp if they were very strong. And then also map locations like fountains. It's just, they are hotspots on the map, and the concepts are so clear in Warcraft 3 that I'm not sure if a rehashed version of that could ever make it into, you know, the kids' playrooms. But if something like this came out with AAA type support, I think that might be the one RTS we could see that might revitalize RTS as an esport.
You don't think you know, the kids these days are going to stop flossing and talk about, you know, Moon's Ancient of War rush on Lost Temple? You don't think that's going to happen?
Probably not. The thing is, the great thing really about Warcraft was, I think much more so than StarCraft, was that playing 4v4 with friends was actually really fun. And just, you know, it is almost not in our, or I'm not sure if it ever was, or if it was just the hardcore gamers, but these 1v1 type of esports don't seem to work with an audience nowadays, right? It's like people want to either, you know, play with their friends or not depend, or take all the blame themselves, whatever reason there might be. That wasn't as bad in Warcraft 3, because like 3v3, 4v4 was very cool to play. There were even some strategies, and it was insane. We played 4v4 with, so my crazy friend who was very good, and I played with like 2 friends who weren't as good. But that didn't matter, because what we were doing was we were feeding. So these bad players would just build a hero and give us all their resources. They would harass with the heroes, so all they had to do was micro their hero, while we were building bigger armies, and we then could control, and you could also hand over control of other units. So the good player could, you know, micro here and there, and in the end, it really felt like you still won as a team, even though some people carried them. And the skill difference was really not that problematic. And I also remember, I'm not sure if that would still hold up today, because I think it was a slightly inferior strategy to playing normally. But we were playing like, we were fighting for the first spot in 4v4 with strategies like this, like with really mediocre players on our team, which was just fun, you know, like we were macroing up, creeping, and they were like shouting at each other because they couldn't control their one hero properly. So yeah, no, like that was a lot of fun, and I think that sort of got lost in the StarCraft juice.
The big overarching, you know, macro strategy, real time, big picture stuff.
Yeah, I think also that, like, generally fights in StarCraft are just too many units to make 4v4 or 3v3 feasible.
True.
There's not too much micro. You could micro, but it doesn't feel that impactful. In Warcraft, you have a lot of healing mechanics for units, right? You could like, you have heroes that can heal units, so pulling them out at the last moment at 5 HP not only feels rewarding, but also you can get them back up. They're not just dead like they are with many units in StarCraft games, right? Like, they're never going to get back up again for some of these races. So yeah, I thought that was always a fun aspect of Warcraft 3.
Well, I mean, to kind of touch on that, and again, I have very, very little Warcraft 3 competitive experience. Well, I shouldn't say very little. I have 0 Warcraft 3 competitive experience. I played a lot when I was a kid. That kind of got me into, like, Warcraft and the kind of lore around that, I guess you could say. And each character, each unit had its own spells. Like, I remember the foot soldiers for human had like a shield up mechanic where they would be slower but would take less projectile damage, you know. It felt like every single unit had spells, whereas in StarCraft, like, you had, like, you know, like the Marines had stim, and the medics would have some spells that were used every so often, but you'd have to research them, and you had to do that in Warcraft 3 as well. But it felt like there was a lot of individual little unit by unit kind of interactions that you could have. Would you say that again kind of supports the idea that this was a very intensely micro focused game, less so about the macro?
Yeah. Definitely was the case. Like for instance, just for night elves, right?
Sure.
All female night elves could during the night stealth, and there were ways to uncover stealth, but you had to prepare for them. So what you could do is, like, if you have long range units, you pop up here, you shoot, then like when the melee unit comes close, you stealth, then the other guy on the other side stealth or stuff like this, right? Like inherently just the races had a lot of mechanics, and then but like very few units didn't have an ability, basically. There were some, but yeah, most of the time they had something that was interesting. It's also, if you think about it, it was so advanced in terms of what the mechanics were of the game. Yeah. So for instance, if you looked at the Mortar team, right, the human unit, it wasn't just that you point and clicked on a building.
A structure.
It had collision systems, right? You could shoot towards a specific location, and if the mortar then came down when other units were in there, then they would get damage, right? It would check for that type of damage. That of course also allowed for a lot of mini games to work. The map editor to this day, yes, it's unreal how far ahead it was of its time, and what great, like, basically the entire MOBA market.
We wouldn't have a lot of esports today if it wasn't for the Warcraft 3, map editor and that custom game community. So again, hats off to them. Warcraft, and you can't not talk about that because it is so ingrained within Warcraft. I still have friends to this day that have Warcraft 3 on their PCs and will go and play original Dota. They'll play some tower defense, which again, kind of, I wouldn't say created that genre of game, but definitely popularized it for like the early 2000s. Yes. It was Warcraft 3. You played tower defense. It was fun, right?
Yeah, tower defense. The people don't realize this because it wasn't really an esport ever. Sure. But tower defense was for a while the thing like BR's battle royales are right now. Everything suddenly was a tower defense. Like they had 3D adaptations. Actually, the very core game mechanic of Fortnite, when it came out, was try to defend yourself by building a base, and like, I'm not sure if they have self-shooting turrets or whatever, but building in order to, survive zombie mazes or whatever, right? But that is a thing that was, I guess it was also in StarCraft 1 from the editor, then ported into Warcraft 3, and that entire genre, like Flash games, Orcs Must Die, like these types of games all spawned from this very idea, basically, that we wanted to, have these types of matches, and then people found the essence in them, and the idea of, okay, it's very interesting what to do. Like it's not high maintenance. There's no like while clicking. It's actually a lot of thinking. How do you like optimize here, min max, and that genre was spawned from the Warcraft 3 map editor as well.
And it's, like I said, it's a legend of its own accord, spawning multiple different game genres and really being something that a lot of people look back fondly on. But Warcraft 3 also kind of pioneered or helped to lay the foundations of one of the, at least our generation, like a very, very significant pop culture icon, which was World of Warcraft, which again, something that you were heavily into. I think, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but there's a very specific video that I think Yiska will remember that he showed me very early on when we first became friends, where he used to, and correct me if I'm wrong if I speak out of school here, but you used to jog to create blog posts.
To blog.
Is that right? Yeah, yes. Is that right?
Jogging for blogging. Yeah, so basically, like Warcraft 3, when we were playing Warcraft 3, we heard of World of Warcraft, and we were all like, we're not paying 12 euros a month to play this. Yeah, I mean, that definitely didn't work out as we planned then.
Sure.
We went pretty hardcore there. So basically, I started playing World of Warcraft. Funnily enough, on an RP server for the longest time.
Really?
Got into Arena, yeah. Into Arena, and then I was still raiding at the time, so arenas were not a thing in the start of the game. Did a lot of PvP though. The battlegrounds basically.
Yeah.
We were on the. I never made it to Grand Marshal. I was more like in the group that would push people towards Grand Marshal. Okay. We had like 2 of them, and the grind system was pretty
painful,
intense,
from what I understand.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, most of the time, because you were only playing on your server, and if you had a bad ratio, then Horde, the Horde on our server would be able to queue the entire day. Our queues were like 2 to 3 hours long at times. Right. Most of the time, 1.5. But if you missed one of those rounds a day, then you couldn't get Grand Marshal. So we had to be there for those. And it basically was like play half an hour of PvP and then go to Hearthglen and farm your mats for raids, right?
Sure.
So because PvE gear was still very important in PvP, and I enjoyed it a great deal. And then I remember it must have been end of season 3.
Okay.
I had like two good friends, and we were playing, and one of the friends said, well, this is really not that competitive here in the German battle group for Arena 3v3 at the time. Let's transfer to Cyclone. And Cyclone was the PvP battle group. So battle groups were basically like a connection between servers that would then queue against each other in Arena. It's the first time they bridged the server-only gap. We made it so that better players could go there. And then you had the transfer mechanics, and that allowed a lot of people, or made a lot of people switch to Cyclone, the good ones. And yeah, it was very competitive for a while. We played Rogue Mage Druid in season 3, where farming pretty much Blutdurst was the name. We weren't first, but there was really only like 3 or 4 other competitive teams at the time. We were like, okay, let's go to Cyclone. They will follow us anyway and try our luck there. And I think we made Gladiator at least that season, even though there was, some Gladiators like top 5.
Yeah, that's still like definitely very respectable.
Yeah, and then season 4 rolled around. I think we still played RMD. In hindsight, we have to say, like, I'm pretty sure I was playing low-key with one of the best druids in the world without anyone ever knowing, because both I and my rogue, we were really not top-notch, but we were winning against some of the best teams in the world at the time in very high-skill match team mirrors. And some of those, we became tournament players at the end, right? And then I think season 5 then was the first Wrath of the Lich King season, if I'm not mistaken, and we cheesed it up with
the Paladin
Death Knight Prod Paladin. And yeah, that was like me and my friend. Okay, my friend actually became a very good DK. The druid was still as good as ever, and I was like, yeah, I'm probably not good enough to play mage competitively because mage was probably the most high skill cap class. And I was like, okay, so let's basically, our comp went like, okay, we're going in, blow all of our cooldowns. This guy has to use an item that's called the PvP trinket, which lets them get out of crowd control instantly. And then we wait for our cooldowns to come up. And the second time, this guy can't survive. The burst is too much, the CC is too much. He will die. So basically, all our matches had like a 2-minute timer. And if the other team couldn't kill us before the 2-minute timer, it was basically over. And we were competing for rank 1 Cyclone. and at the same time, a Gamescom tournament happens.
Mm.
And I'm already writing blogs, and that's where jogging for blogging came from.
Sure.
I at the time I was in law school, and in the first year, okay, so the German system is sort of weird. You can write all the class, like all the exams of the first semester, or of the first 2 semesters in the first semester, and I did that. So basically, second semester I only had to show up and really not do anything, and or that's at least what you were required to do. You could have, of course, done more, but yeah, during the time I started writing and have this jogging for blogging thing, and because I'm like deep in my books, I also gained a lot of weight. So I said, okay, I was always like a long distance runner. Let's get back into that. Let's do jogging for blogging. And basically what I did was, I was quite heavy at the time, and I said, okay, for every 10 likes that this blog post gets, and the site I was writing for was Game Riot, and they had upvotes already, long before Reddit, I think. And yeah, I ended up having to run like 12 or 14 kilometers on my first run.
Ow.
And I had like blisters on my, it was miserable, but like I had this GPS device, my cell phone back in the day had like GPS, and it could like draw the map, and people were live cheering for me, and I could hear that. Yeah,
that's cool.
It was insane. And yeah, basically that then happened, and I carved myself out. So okay, in order to explain where I got into content creation, before I already was doing replays for replays.com in Warcraft 3. So I was doing replays, looked at them, and then when they were very good, I would give it to another staff member who would double check, so we could put them into the recommended section, right? And you were like required on average to watch like 5 replays a day. And yeah, that basically I wrote those, and with very dodgy English. This is basically where I learned English. And so then I get into World of Warcraft content creation, and it's basically, there is this guy, and it's probably the best the best content creator, or the most efficient, if you were going by hits, content creator that esports fans probably have never heard of. And this guy was called Ming. And he had a website called World of Ming, and he initially only did like rogue theory crafting, and he started like mixing in a little bit of drama, and crucially Naruto. Naruto was like the anime at the time.
Sure.
And he made these comparisons, and he like invented names for players, and in a sense mythologized, even though it was quite memey at the time. For instance, like one of the rogues was called the Golden Child, and there was Nilio, and I forget what Rekful was called, but Rekful was a very big personality, because it was still sort of rogue-centric, but not really. And the names that people would also recognize nowadays maybe is Pooks. Pooks for a while was the best mage possibly in the world, but definitely in the US, and was playing for EG, and yeah, that like there were a lot of personalities from that, but this guy had basically like the strong grip on the American scene, and he would also use that America versus NA type of rivalry, and he had insane hits for the time, right? I don't think anyone in competitive Overwatch is getting the hits that this guy is getting. He was making, I think, between...
Like, would you compare it to, like, League? Because I know League content does very, very well. Like, pretty, on average, pretty consistently. Would you compare it to, like, those numbers? Maybe? Without knowing specifics, but... Yeah,
it is possible. Because this guy... It was basically... Remember, it wasn't like the internet was centralized. Everyone had, like, their little fan sites that would go to, and this guy would have a blog up every day, and then he would get other people on, and they were crazy personalities on. I remember he had one woman on there called Millies, and she was the ex-girlfriend of from Jackass,
Steve-O?
Stevo.
Oh,
Was
really?
the
What?
Swiffer from Stevo, and she had been on some modeling show or whatever, and she was
Okay.
writing about it. She was like fangirling Wreckful and whatever. It was pretty crazy what kind of personalities. Then another guy I remember was Bodhi, who later on became a very successful person, left esports though. Then even some players that they themselves were drama attractors, like Zilea and Serenia were writing on there, and it was insane. Like basically, if you were at all into WoW Arena, you were reading that blog. Now the problem was at some time he pulled some stuff that wasn't kosher. And for instance, one person with that was also around back then, who's still a successful Hearthstone streamer, I think, is Hafu. And Hafu, if you think about what Hafu did, like she was a very good player in World of Warcraft, then went into Bloodline Champions, and then in Hearthstone, she's possibly the most successful esports female player of all time. Yeah. But nobody really recognizes her as such. She was very good back in the day. And playing for a pretty good team. Also, interestingly, together with the Riotcaster Azael, who's now like one of the faces of the LCS, right? So yeah, esports is a village, dude.
It's a small world.
Yeah, and yeah, basically, this dwindled along a little bit. Yeah, and so this guy has the grip on the American market, and I'm like, I could do that for Europe, but I wasn't going to do it alone. I wanted to get some personalities from Europe. I remember I approached Alec, and then I had another guy who was pretty much like a little bit drama attracting, but also very good at theory crafting, called yeah, I can't get the name right now, but
sure.
And initially we wanted to rotate. Well, after the first week almost, it turned into, if I wanted to have this blog release content every day, then I would have to write every day. Right. And I pretty much did that. I wrote like probably on average 1.5 to 3K words a day for like a year, I think. And they had little blog contests. So whoever got the most hits that month could get $250, right? Sure. So then I brought other people on, and because I was also writing for Complexity then. Like I also had a writing gig with Complexity, and people kept recommending me. For instance, one guy that was very helpful back then was JP McDaniel. Ah, okay. And people might know State of the Game, which was the biggest podcast in StarCraft 2. StarCraft 2, I would say. I was on the sort of podcast before that, the archetype of that, and it was called Arena Cast. And I would basically give the juice from Europe, and I basically carved out a name as the guy from Europe. And it actually, like, at the time, it opened quite a lot of doors for me. I remember going to CBIT for an ESL tournament, and Complexity allowed me to be the manager for the Complexity Black team. And I was introduced to, like, the head guy, Intel Europe. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? Because I was from Game Riot, and this side had insane hits. So it was like ESL was always very welcoming towards me, and like I sadly let it slide, but I made some good friends there back in the day. And crucially, and I'll get off my rant here, but
please continue.
I was also on a show format called Overload by Too Good. James Too Good Harding, right? Yeah. I was on there twice, and here it comes back to jogging for blogging, because I was known for jogging for blogging. So I thought, like, why not do that during a live show?
Yes, this is the video. This is the video that I referenced before, the tangent, where I do believe you can still find this on YouTube if you are so inclined to find it. I will not link it, but if you so choose to, you can find it out there. But please continue and describe the efforts of jogging for blogging, talking to, I think, who is his co-host? Because I think it was somebody. Oh, okay.
He works remember still in games, but he was He was a dreamer type, but very funny. Basically, that is the archetype of what now is Sideshow and Bren.
Okay.
Like Zama was Bren, and Sideshow was Too Good, even though Too Good had his shit more together than the Sideshow does.
Sure,
let's be honest.
sure.
He was also better at games. No, Too Good was a pro player in Quake, so
fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, Sideshow get the aim. I'm looking at Zenyatta. I'm not hating, but so basically, the ESL gives me a time, right? And it was sort of like really like a TV show. So
sure.
I would be put on loop, on hold, and I would go out and I had my little headset on, and of course technology was terrible back then. So they tell me, oh, you're going to be on about then and then. I'm like, okay. So I start jogging. I'm already like 30 minutes in. I'm like, okay, so they should call me every minute. And I'm still put in this loop. And then half an hour later, they still haven't called me. And I'm like, man, like jogging gets very, very exhausting now, right? So I think another 15 minutes later, the guy goes, okay, you're going to be on in a second. And I'm like, okay. And I was living outside the city at the time. Sure. So there was a lot of fields. And I was literally in the middle of a field. And wind was blowing hard. So I get put through to the studio. And the first thing James says is like, hey, Yiska, can you get rid of the wind sound? And I'm like, okay, so I'm pulling up my jacket, trying to do this thing, right?
Sure.
Doesn't really work. And it's like, Yiska, can you stop moving? I'm like, I'm not moving. What can I do now? So I'm literally in the middle of a field, like an acre, right? And I put my head into the dirt to form like a, like you have like these little little mountains, and between them I press my face and shield the microphone from the wind and start talking to them. And he's like, yeah, it's not perfect, but this will have to do. I'm like, what do you expect me to do here? Like, it can't get any better. So yeah, and I remember it being like just pitch black, but basically no lights. I'm pressing my head into the dirt, talking about WoW esports, and like being very exhausted too from the run. And yeah, that first interview was an absolute disaster, I think. And I think you can still find it on YouTube, but it was hilarious. I don't know what I was thinking doing that.
Well, I mean, if you're known for something, you want to be, interviewed while you do it. It's kind of on brand, I suppose, at the time.
Yeah.
But, you mentioned that you went to CBIT and you were the manager for this complexity team for a very brief stint. What kind of, you mentioned that you met like the head of Intel Europe, but what other kind of people did you manage? What kind of, maybe some esports names that people might recognize now that you maybe have run into over the years? Yeah, or it did at the time?
Okay, so there was the qualifying event for European players, and it was in a somewhere in Cologne, like almost like a gym. And I remember some guy was casting CS. He had a Lakers shirt on, and he had like puffy hair and red puffy hair. And the WoW players, like, you have to understand, there were the hardcore players. Like, Quake was still on the IEM circuit,
sure,
as well as CS, right? And these were like the hard games. So if WoW comes on, we still were moaning about, the global cooldown, and even the CS players were playing WoW, but said like, oh, it's not that skillful or whatever. So we were like sort of like the scrubs. It was always like a look down mentality, while we're like tripling their views.
Sure.
Right. So sort of like esports looks at Fortnite now, I guess. And yeah, I'm in that venue, and then, for instance, I talked to Alex Müller from SK Gaming, and yeah, the guy I was talking about earlier turned out to be Thorin. And at the time, I didn't know him. I think like for a while, I think one time he asked me back in the day if I wanted to write for SK Gaming. The thing was, American companies were paying very well for writing, while SK Gaming wasn't offering any writing money. So that was a no-brainer for me, right, during the time to take that as a student. So, yeah, but other interesting personalities. For instance, I did observing at CBIT for a while, and Yeah, and for the second stream. And Take from Take TV talked me into that. He was still a product manager during that time there. I remember Sean. I remember Julia, who I'm not sure if she still works at ESL, but she went back to school and did a PhD on like development of children with gaming. That was pretty dope. But she was like one of the higher up people for ESL. Of course, like people like Rekful are probably bigger names nowadays. He was playing in. I was interviewing him because we were in the same organization. He was on Complexity Red though, so he wasn't the team I was coaching. But because I was writing for Complexity, that was sort of like closely connected. And one of the guys that I was also friends with during that time was Reels. And I think he's now on the team for Hearthstone. He's like a
QA tester. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, he's actually higher up than Q&A now.
Okay.
Yeah, like people like that. Is there anyone else that was interesting? I mean, there were super crazy people, and unfortunately, not a lot of European players made it. A lot of American players, like for instance, Talbadar was one. He's now in Q&A at WoW. Toes was around, was streaming for a while. Like that didn't work that well for the European guys for some reason. Like they were more into winning and not really that much about personality. And they were making money. Okay, that is a crazy story. Americans were making money that way as well, but
sure,
for a while they were legitimately billionaires paying WoW players to play arena with them.
Yeah.
And the craziest part is some of them were like crown princes of Arabian countries or something like that.
Like you can find old clips. I think Rekful has one. I think the old StarCraft 2 player In Control now does like tabletop games and whatnot, and does like D&D. I think he has a story where he was approached by like an oil tycoon. He's like, hey, I want you to I want to fly you out to Dubai, and I just want to like hang out with you. Like, would you be interested? And of course you randomly get an email like that, and you're so taken back. But continue. Like this is something that actually happened, people.
It's insane to talk about this now. Like people, it was surreal. I had a couple of friends who did this, and it was like, okay, so we were playing with them, and then suddenly they would get a call, and you'd hear like, the Crown Prince wants to play in 45 minutes, and they're like, okay. And then this guy would get new PCs for them. They would get like almost like an allowance of 1,500 euros back then, which was a lot, right? Yeah. And to top it all off, this guy was not bad at
really?
It was actually pretty good. Like it wasn't a liability to play fives with him. So
okay,
insane. Some colleges were paid by people like that. It wasn't just one. There were businessmen like that. World of Warcraft was all the rage. People wanted to get these #1 titles, and they played with the best players in the world, and they had no feeling for money.
Right, because it wasn't an issue.
Yeah, like I remember one of the teams was invited to Dubai, and they were flying like helicopter rides whenever they wanted to, like just in a top star hotel, just being flown around and just living like insane lifestyles during the time. Something that we now only connect to like the YouTubing type.
Sure.
They were doing that way before YouTube popped off that way, right? Absolutely insane. So yeah, and that worked out for quite some. Of course, I mean, boosting was also a thing in World of Warcraft.
Of course, I think it's in any game, any competitive game. You're gonna have people that are good and want to monetize it, and you could look at it however you want, but it exists.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it's also like there are other people that legitimately just are set for life because of boosting now.
Sure,
it's absolutely nuts. They ran companies and whatever. Yeah, I don't know. It's It was a crazy time because, okay, so theoretically this was after the esports bubble bursted after CGS.
Sure.
Yes. So esports in itself wasn't that big, but it was ramping up to be, right? And we were getting these like big stages at IEM, and they were renting out like pretty big venues in Cologne, and like World of Warcraft had stupid amounts of hits. I remember hearing numbers at CeBIT, like literally like tripling the numbers of CS and Quake combined or something like this.
And from my understanding, because again, like I've been a lurker in esports for a long time, never just really set foot until Overwatch. But I remember hearing people like Sir Scoots and Adam Apicella and people at MLG talking about those numbers, and they couldn't be believed because they were so outlandish, from my understanding at least how I remember.
Yeah. But that was the thing. Like World of Warcraft was by far the biggest game, like League of Legends was for the time afterwards.
Right.
And that way it actually made sense. And also, like, not gonna lie, Ming had a big part of it to just like get the drama aspect into esports as well. Like this guy carried that scene, and it was at times in a dirty way.
Sure.
But most of the time it was just silly, right? It was really silly, and people like just loved the silliness of that spectacle. And there were cool personalities like Rackful, like Vangrookie, guys like that who had a certain, swagger about them and could like just work as people. And that was always, of course, I remember there was a guy called Affix, and he was a mage. He was always talking about theorycraft, and then he was like sort of like a respected individual in the scene. And then he got access to Xfire, which to my understanding was one of the first streaming services possible. But even at the time, that was like an alpha test. So this guy was only allowed to ever stream like very, very little because the gigabytes were ramping up, whatever. Like the technology wasn't there. But yeah, that was like immediately a lot of people were watching, even though this guy wasn't like a huge name. And that was sort of when streaming began, I think. Like pre-Cataclysm.
Sure.
They were tinkering around with that. And yeah, like we were feeling like, okay, so this, like MLG was running World of Warcraft alongside Halo. IEM was running World of Warcraft. Like we were on a high, right? We were we're getting job offers. Sadly, I ran into one of the, I wouldn't call it scam, but yeah, it was shady. Called Six Jacks. And they had a stack of two team.
Some old people will remember.
Yeah, Atrosis was involved in there, and I wrote for their WoW section. And like I was a student, I needed to just make a little bit of money, and that was fine. The game right thing, I was then splitting it, and I was honestly, like I had a couple of interesting people on my blog roll, and I was paying them, so there wasn't much left over when my month was done. So I was like, okay, so now I'm getting myself paid, right? Complexity was paying me well means $25 an article back then, right? So I was sort of hyped, and then I thought, okay, so now let's professionalize this. Sadly, we ran into that one problem, and then of course the scene sort of was killed off, I would say.
Yeah, kind of once the plug was pulled on MLG, and people clamped down on the scene, I can imagine it was very difficult to make that happen. And that's where I feel like there's a big gap in your story, where WoW kind of fizzles off, then you pop back up in Overwatch. What was the life of Yiska in those years in between?
So I remember, like, I was leveling Cataclysm. We weren't getting any WoW tournaments.
Sure.
One of my basically my best friend at the time, who was like supporting me doing the back end stuff for the blog post, sadly passed away, and I was like, okay, I'm fucking done with this.
Sure. And
I was also like being owned, for me, very substantial amounts of money. Godfrag really did me dirty, and I was like, okay, so everyone's in this scene is basically scamming. I was basically, in a lot of ways, the Volamel of World of Warcraft because I was just like, you get like the puppy protection if you're young enough, right? Like where if you just sit down, you just do your work, people older than you, more successful than you will just come over and give you a hand and will try to give you opportunities. And that was happening. And at the end, like the people try to provide opportunities for them. I'm not blaming the guys that gave me the opportunities.
Right,
a lot of them ended up working out, like the complexity deal, for instance. But that JP McDaniel got me. But some of them absolutely didn't. And actually, like I was actively thinking about like stopping the Lost Tool stuff and just getting into content creation. Actually took a break from that semester and just wanted to really grind it out. Also do more than esports stuff, do a little bit of Cataclysm stuff. Yeah, and then it all came crashing down. And I think for a while I think then League of Legends sort of started happening, and my group of friends then basically that has been my life for the longest time. Is I get into an English community like we have now with our Discord. And then at some point, something happens to that, and I bounce back to my German friends, and then I go back to my German gaming friends, and then blah, 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 back and forth, right? And, I was basically back into that German group, and we were playing League of Legends. I was actively following StarCraft 2, played that a bunch, because I wanted to get my RTS out of my system again from Warcraft, and... I remember also, like, way back in the day, I already was playing against Internet Hulk, and then also in StarCraft 2, I was following around. He was very close here, and actually, like, funny enough, again, esports is a village. Like, we have common relatives, as it turned out, and like that all happened. I was really just a consumer of esports for the longest time while I was doing stuff in real life.
Sure.
And somehow I signed up for the Overwatch beta.
Oh, did you?
And I tried to get into the Overwatch beta, and I did it on one account, just my main account, and was like, not very likely, right? And then I got it, and I was waiting for all my German friends to get it because, like, I thought, okay, this is very normal to get it. As it turns out, no, you were one of the select few. And to this day, I still don't know if someone from my that eventual Blizzard friends put me on that list. And if they did, I'm very thankful to them because, A, you never told me. So you're sort of like the silent helper. But that put me really onto the path that I've taken now. Like, I got into beta, like, pretty much. Like, they had the very first wave, and then the second wave I was already on, 2 weeks later. So very early in beta, I was already watching streams. I looked at the tournaments and whatever, and started playing. And it's funny. Like, a lot of the top European players I already encountered back then, like Numlocked or Nevix. Like those were the guys I was playing against in my games back then, right? So it's pretty crazy.
And of course, and I still think these are out there as well, but you were a part of a very early podcast, or I believe the name was Watchpoint, funnily enough. Went for quite a while, did a lot of theory crafting, study of the game, talk about the game. You're a co-host there. Yeah,
well, the thing is, it was okay, so back then the main subreddit started up, and there was not yet the separation. So I put out a post, said, okay, I want to make a podcast out of this, right? And two guys messaged me immediately, and we already get coordinating. And then, like, a week later, someone else sends me a message and says, like, oh yeah, I really want to be part of this. I'm very good at editing, blah, blah, blah. And it was too late basically at this point. But this other guy turned out to be Hame, who is like a featured content creator, does very clean, like lore stuff, then also imagery stuff, like very high quality. I think like 500k YouTuber now for Overwatch on YouTube. That's sort of, we let that opportunity pass, I guess.
Well, I mean, how could you know?
Yeah, of course. The two guys that was doing it with were very nice. We did it actually for a while. I think almost a year, maybe longer.
Yeah, you guys were going on like, I would say 50+ episodes, no?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And
great and stuff.
It wasn't that hardcore.
No,
like,
of course
I was pushing for the hardcore
yes
angle, while the other two were like also interested
doing
in
like
skins.
Yeah, of course, like talking about the game. Very much it felt like a Chan Man show where he came in, dabbled across every field. You'd have somebody come in, talk about like the skins and like what's happening with the game, what events out, and then you'd have somebody that talks about like the tournaments, and very much a successful format. Just needed to breathe and grow. And whatever kind of happened with that,
with the podcast.
Yeah.
So one of the guys was a dad of 3.
Oh, okay.
And
so difficult to carve out some time for games.
Yeah, and he also wasn't feeling Overwatch much. Like, he was really an FPS head, and when you realize this isn't going to take the purest FPS route,
right,
he said like, yeah, my drive is not really, and that was fair enough. And then we tried for like 2 episodes to do it without him, but yeah, it unfortunately fizzled out. And yeah, that never really happened, even though, like, it's funny. I look at some of those videos, and because we could still post on the main subreddit, some of them have pretty like much higher views than videos get nowadays on our Overwatch. Really? Like, even if Harsha puts like a video out, it's like 1.2K views or something like that. Like, we were getting some of those videos had like 5K views or whatever. Wow. Of course, this is all like, I remember posting something. It was called "Don't Marry the Meta," and it was basically about Envious picking up Mickey. And I was concerned that this team, as it was only ever viable in that one meta, and that this would be problematic down the line. And while they won Apex based off that, and I was like putting it into a Yiska analogy, like, marrying someone is like signing a contract, and then there's kids, which are like the trophies and whatever. And I was doing it in a playful way, but really the title, "Don't Marry the Meta," and we both know nobody reads articles really anymore, like percentage-wise speaking. Like, it's like, oh, this title appeals to me, click. Oh, it's not about that.
It's not about yeah. but the few people who do, we love you. We love you for reading all of the jargon that we write. But yes,
absolutely.
I remember "Don't Marry the Meta." I remember the Many-Faced God talking about, I think, Mendo. Yeah, you've had some pretty prolific.
Many-Faced God was about Tivik.
Oh, okay.
And Mendo at the time was in that, and it's interesting because the "Don't Marry the Meta" one has over 100,000 views now.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing comes close in terms of content because we don't get to post on the main subreddit. And honestly, if you need to go by CPM, none of the writers probably in Overwatch are profitable unless you can tune up the CPM not with, like, other cool ways to monetize. But yeah, that was still pretty cool to be able to write there or get that on the front page on our Overwatch. And yeah, I was doing a little bit of writing. I remember then I joined Gosu Gamers because I was mostly posting a Medium because I like the aesthetics of it. And yes, then Broda, I think his name was, approached me and said like, "Yeah, want to write for us?" I did that for a bit. Wrote a couple of articles there, some news, because with Ghost of Games you always have to have like a share news to feature posts. And I was doing my Essence of Heroes
interview
series. Yeah, I was doing like feature articles, for instance, on Cloud9. I was doing like, for a while, Immortals was really pushing like their content creation, and we had like an interview with verbose and Nomi, And I did that together with Peggy, and that's basically where I got to know Peggy. And,
Moirai, for those who aren't familiar with their first name, I'm sure you've seen some of their content, plastered around all of everywhere, because they do some very, very sick stuff. But can continue.
Yeah, their recent YouTube montage was
quite
sweet,
nice. Yeah,
I gotta say. Yeah. So again, Ghost of Gamers is not paid, so eventually, okay, so I get to know this guy called Carachol, and he's like a Greek guy, and he asks me, like, we get into an argument, and that is actually a trend in esports. I think a lot of people get into an argument,
because that's how we first met. Is we bickered back and forth on Twitter. I think it had to do something with Kongdu Panthera, and then we took it to DMs, and then I was like, oh, I think this guy's actually like pretty reasonable. We'll have a discussion. It's not like just some random social media guy who just wants to like hate you. Nice guy. So again, it sounds like it was something very similar with Carl, that you debate, you kind of learn them that way, and you kind of befriend them. But continue, because I know I kind of know where you're headed with this. But.
Yeah, and then he is already working with Winston's Lab on stuff, and he introduces me to Baroy, and we talk a little bit, and eventually, okay, so then I do a podcast with Carachol, and it was called
G-rated.
G-rated, exactly. Yeah, and what was the name? That was the name of the channel. The actual podcast was called Overrated.
Yes, and you'd have your little intros that were quite funny at times. Some of them were pretty funny.
And I remember we actually, like, Carachol especially had a pretty good nose for talent. Like, we had, for instance, Aero on very early, and we're getting to know him, and we were singing high praises for him. And that pretty much also, like, just getting to know him, like, if you look at the content we created before, even after Overrated,
sure,
we created during when Aero wasn't signed, we were always massively positive on him, right? Like, this guy was just underrated. It's just he was managing so many teams that were really like contenders then.
Yes.
He raised them up, and we're always contending to be like one of the best T2 teams, so to speak, in their region. And him always getting passed up first, being let go by Immortals, then not being signed by Outlaws. That was just heartbreaking, because we knew this guy is a very good coach. He has the fundamentals. He understands how to lead people. Why is he not getting opportunities, right? And so, yeah, that podcast in itself, it was highly technical. We were dry, dude. Like, Carachol himself has a very dry humor, and yeah, like we were talking about very technical topics, and it is actually hard probably for most viewers to understand that I got less dry over the year 2008. Like, I'm very dry now, but I was bone dry at the start, and I'm trying to get there. And yeah, eventually he didn't feel it anymore in Overwatch, sort of left that scene. And I was still then already friends with Baroy, met him at Takeover, and he asked me to write for Winston's Lab, and that's where I've been writing till now. But yeah, like, because of Winston's Lab, of course, we made a lot of dope friends, like Eden.
Yeah.
And we just keep adding to the pile of like cool insider people, and really, it's really a fruitful, like, sort of bouncing of information, where sometimes I fear that we're getting too far ahead of ourselves in terms of what we talk about and what the community can yet understand. Because if you get people into the mix who are legitimately Like even you put them in a room with Overwatch League coaches,
Sure,
and you let them talk, I think they emerge from that as the top 10% of Overwatch knowledge. Someone like Dream, right?
sure.
So when you basically, my idea always is, and I tell that to children too, because I teach now, so that's what I was doing in real life. And like the best thing you can do is sort of change your environment if you're not being productive. Like just try to get people in, because input is output. Now, if you have quality input from the outside and surround yourself with like very knowledgeable people that aren't yes men, that is also very important, that it doesn't create an echo chamber. It facilitates content. The problem is that you have to sort of give that lifeline where the viewer can pull themselves up on to understand the level you're talking about. That is basically like my New Year's resolution, to get much better at that, to really be mindful of where I let people leave people off in terms of knowledge. And it is hard, because if you are only communicating with like people that are deep into Overwatch, then, and they also have to protect some of the information, of course, you know, like strategy and whatever. Like it's hard to not only dance around your knowledge, but also know what the average level is, that people can still understand what you're saying.
Yeah, no, it's something that I think a lot of content creators have to go through, whether it's written, whether it's video, if it's a podcast. It can't just be all about what you're interested in, unless you're already at that level and people love your brand and are really invested in you, and then they're there for you in the first place, so you can kind of have that freedom. But there is I think a fine art to kind of like finding yourself in terms of how you relate to people. Like, how much sugar do I have to put on the cough medicine so that the kid will take it, you know? Nobody likes to take cough medicine. It's still, to this day, I think that's the $1 million industry that we need to crack into, is revolutionizing cough medicine, because it still tastes like absolute butthole.
The problem I have for myself is I still want it to be medicine.
Yeah, you enjoy the anguish.
I don't want it to be just sugar.
Of course.
So, like, for me, okay, so just conceptually, right? I understand that a lot of people perceive esports or Overwatch as a competition as entertainment. It's just something, you come home from work, it's like relaxing to watch that and have a little bit of the competitive drive out of you. I think there's much more subconscious stuff that gets emitted to an audience in there, and messaging, imagery, and the values that are being transported are immensely important. And if we think that Overwatch might be the prototype of what the future of esports might look like, then laying the brickworks that the tone of the broadcast isn't only like fun and games, but also life enhancing experiences, is at the heart of all my content I do. And I'm afraid I was, for the most part, was going very hard on the medicine and not enough on the sugar this year. But yeah, I'm trying to reevaluate these ratios. But yeah, basically, like, if you had a hierarchy of things that's happening, right? On the ground floor, it's of course entertainment. Like, it's just that's something that people
want to be entertained,
joy from.
Yes.
But like, the first thing is like happiness and joy, right? And then, of course, people that produce this entertainment need to eat, so the money needs to be there to lubricate that system so it's sustainable. But at the highest level for me are the levels, the values that are being purported. And I think, in essence, really, sports is a control mechanism for society in many ways. Also, traditional sports in that sense. So while people get their drama, their almost requirement to see some sort of violence, right? You see boxing
In a
matches,
way, yeah.
and like their idea of unrealistic relationships between like, you know, like pro players and themselves. Like this is sort of like they get that out of their system. It's something that occupies the rascal, right, in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like a sponge for negativity. While on the plus side, it also ought to transport values,
Sure.
right, that are invoked in the viewers. So one of them that I've been big on was basically appreciation and pursuit of excellence, but it's also just general virtues, appreciation, and then also empathy, right? And this is probably something I was not good at this year, is to, and only really over the holidays came to realize that the humanization of esports is an important part, because while it is basically us spinning our own mythology, it is very important that we don't perceive these people as gods.
Yes.
And it's not literal gods. Don't take me too literally here.
Yeah,
but
it's metaphorical, but...
Yes, gods as ideas, right? As unrealistic
untouchable
scenarios.
Putting people on pedestals is quite dangerous.
Yeah, because in themselves they are rascals, right? There's like one of my favorite philosophers called Alan Watts has this concept of the irreducible element of rascality. And then, for instance, like a lot of world religions have this, like the I think Judaism has the Yetzer Hara. Jung had the shadow, like this element that there's potentiality of like just being of evil in you, and to find like a wealth for that in something, right? That hence why like toxicity in itself is not that problematic, because I think there's a threshold for, like, for me it is a problem as soon as that toxicity creates more toxicity,
right,
and isn't just a thing that gets out of the system. If it actually breeds more toxicity, that is the problem, not necessarily that there's toxicity in the first place. And
to kind of understand that a little bit, it's the issue that you have is that it creates this never-ending cycle, but it's fine in the sense that we all kind of have a little bit of like what you kind of call rascality. Like, we're all kind of a little bit edgy at times. Like there's not a perfect person, right? And just to kind of break that down. Okay.
I mean, there's just, okay, so if you watch an entertaining movie, like a comedy, right?
Sure.
Even though there often is, there doesn't necessarily have to be an element that upsets you. It can, from start to finish, be a very unlike real life experience where everything is going well.
Sure.
And in itself, it doesn't need to be a self-contained system. I think for sports entertainment, this couldn't be further from the truth. In order for sports to not only feel authentic, but to like spread its full value, you need all the parts of life. You need the downs. You need to tell the story of the bad, of the worst teams, right?
To kind of accentuate the good teams.
Yes, exactly. Because sadly, in us, there is this hedonistic treadmill, right?
Sure.
Like, if everything is amazing, then amazing becomes normal, and we need insane. Now every clip on our competitive Overwatch is insane. And insane suddenly is normal. So what do? Do we race to the top and just say, like, galactical, like, universal, like, you're running out of adjectives. No, what you gotta do is, I was actually going to do a video on this, but I found out that it wasn't that substantial, but I guess it's a fine point to bring up now. I think there's also a certain celebration of the duality of systems. And what do I mean by that is the same way that there can be a celebration of excellence, but there has to be an appreciation of mediocrity or like bad things, right? In the same sense that you cherish life there needs to be a part of you that accepts death in a sense. There is this, you can't conceive of things without having the contrast, right?
Sure.
Like it's, you need basically the other side of the balance in order to appreciate it. Just ask yourself, if you, for instance, get a holiday paid and you didn't work for it at all, and you were really a lazy sack, like maybe you were in college during that time.
Sure.
Like, how much are you going to enjoy that specific
hard to
holiday?
say. Yeah.
But if you really work for it, even if you get a worse holiday, and if it was really strenuous, like, because you had the suffering element of it, the good parts feel so much better. It's like you go on a long walk, you don't have water, and usually you're like, water, I wouldn't pop, dude. Like, water is like so bland. No, if you've gone through like mountains and hills and come home and finally have the water, that is godly ambrosia, right? So it is also very important to me that it doesn't just turn into this race to the top of adjectives and also emotion, but that we tell the story of the terrible.
Yeah, and it's important. Like you said, like you don't really appreciate things until you're faced with like the immediate opposite. In a great example that I've seen kind of repeated just through the content that I absorb, comedian Bert Kreischer has a podcast. People might know him from his very enigmatic story about him in Russia and potentially robbing a train car. Just saying, it's out there. Look it up. And it's, you know, in jest for the most part, or is it? Who knows? So he talks about doing this massive bungee jump, and he kind of breaks down his experience and then the most recent experience that Will Smith had, I think celebrating his birthday, like jumping out of a helicopter. And he draws the tie-ins there, and he talks about how you really don't feel alive until you're met with like the tease of this could just go all wrong and I could just fall into the Grand Canyon and just be a pancake. And it's kind of this life reset where you're faced with this possibility of imminent disaster, and in that moment it's inexplainable on how alive you feel in that moment, because now the pizza that I eat when I get off this bungee cord and the celebration that I can have with my family is so heightened because of what could have happened, right? And that's the same thing when we look at the Overwatch, like what Yiska is saying. The NYXL, the London Spitfires, you know, these great teams don't look as good when we don't have anything to compare them to, when we don't have the Shanghai Dragons, when we don't have the Florida Mayhem. So it's not that I guess I shouldn't speak for you. Would you say that we need this, or we have to at least acknowledge that it kind of exists?
We have to call it like it is.
Sure.
We don't have to dramatize how awful something is.
Sure.
We basically, what we need to do is just tell it like it is. Like, in itself, Overwatch is already a metaphor for real life applications, right? Like, that's the beauty of video games. It's so abstract what is happening. It's just like colorful video game characters fight each other by like also being like apes, intelligent apes on the other.
Sure.
You know, it's completely bizarre if you really think about it. But because it's so bizarre, it allows you to take a step back and see the metaphors behind the stories that you're being told, right? It's like, wait, okay, so in itself, okay, this is gameplay, but under that, what is that? Who's there, right? What are they feeling? What are the circumstances that they had to overcome? And in essence, this applies to everyone's life, right? And to see top performers in a highly metaphorized field, that is the maximum value that sports provides. It's just something that has absolutely nothing to do with the survival of the fittest or whatever.
No.
But it encapsulates still that essence of competition and really grabs it all and lets the viewer sort of gain intuitive lessons, especially if you can tell the stories of what it's actually like behind the scenes. That's why I also
how players got there. You know, a great one, Nomi. Look at how much adversity he's had to go through and what you know, being in the Overwatch League or being in the Overwatch community means to him and his family. You know, something that you've quite been familiar with, you know, interviewing him back on Immortals. Yeah.
Just following and really getting an idea. And also that, like, you gotta be genuine in your reporting. You can't over dramatize it, or we all get insensitive towards it, right?
Like you said, it's that treadmill.
Yes, exactly. So if we can, in 2019, I guess, sort of get that authenticity in the Overwatch scene, and then also like the guys, like there are content creators that were much better than me at getting the sugar, right?
Sure.
But if we can meet in the middle and give the medicine to the masses while also giving the sugar to the masses so they can swallow it down, I think like that is the sweet spot for the future of like the archetype of what should be an esports league for decades to come.
Yeah. And I think now that we've told the story, last kind of little thing, you touched on New Year's resolutions. Do you have anything other than, you know, trying to make the content a little sweeter? Are you anything personal that you've got coming up that you want to, you know, work on? Any kind of New Year's resolution for you? Because it is 2019.
So one thing I want to do is make my, you know, thinking it over a little bit more approachable, I guess.
Okay.
Look at the verbiage I'm using. Always provide like entry points, because that is something that I had to professionally overcome. Just like the knowledge gap of what I know and what the child can know at this point. And really, like, basically what I want to do in 2019 is go explore the community like I would do for the individual child. So if the child comes to me and says, okay, I don't understand this thing, then I go like, okay, do you understand this? Nah, I don't really know how the negative numbers thing works. Oh, well, that was too... Oh, okay, it doesn't matter. Come on, let's go do the negative numbers thing again. I don't know how these fractions work. Oh, that's 3. It doesn't matter. We're going to do fractions and really get down to what the average is, like where most people are helped by in finding this thing that I possibly arrogantly assume is already common knowledge, right? And to bring other people towards that level and find exactly that sweet spot where the information is. And in 2018, I was really trying to like build content. You know, this idea, build it and they will come.
Sure.
And that worked very well in World of Warcraft because my personal interests were different. I just did what I thought was entertaining.
Right.
Now, as an older guy, I'm leaving a lot of people behind based on that. I think my audience, if I look at my demographics, is like nobody's under 25.
Yeah.
So I gotta find a way to incorporate the masses, which is the under 25s, and do so in a meaningful way. And I've already like sat down, because one aspect of entertainment that does it very well, I think, is Pixar, where they somehow have the ability to get children to want to see the movie and then bring their parents along.
Exactly.
But the parents themselves don't feel bored because there's underlying messaging of like some strings being pulled of adult life that the reference is lost on the child. Exactly. But it resonates with the older folks. And if I can incorporate that into my content, or have some of the pieces, because it's extremely hard, but it's just some of the pieces of that caliber, or just in that general ballpark, I think that would be a successful year for me.
Awesome. And, you know, I've underneath your finely manicured beard is your Twitter handle, but I know that you have your own kind of podcast out there. You know, where can the people find you if they want to consume more of your thoughts and your Yiska-isms? Yeah,
so at Yiska out on Twitter is probably the most reliable source because I post all my content there. Tomorrow I'll get a video out, and then I'll try to get a streak going. I have a little bit of vacation left.
Okay.
just try to do some there. Looking forward to Tactical Crouch, which is not going to happen today.
Well,
um,
stuff happens, man.
But hopefully it will this week. So I'm looking forward to that. I think we're getting into a very cool position where a lot of people are already responding quite positively towards that. And if we can grind it out, that could be very nice. I think we got the sugar there.
Definitely. Definitely. Good mix of people that can bring all sides of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And then just, I think it's Yiska out on YouTube. But yeah, Twitter is just the most reliable source for my
Go follow him, folks. He definitely has some fantastic thoughts. But yeah, that's delve further today. Follow everybody. I'll link their stuff in the description, and thanks for participating. I appreciate you, Yiska, for coming on, and here's to a empty cup, but here's to 2019, buddy.